on a Friday morning, then do get in touch with us. But we'd love you to do it. 01254 583 583 81333. Stick Lancs in front of your message. Now, we're talking this morning about the Welfare Reform Act. It is coming, but do you actually know what it's going to mean to you? 2 months' time it happens. If you're on a low income, out of work, or if you have a disability, how is it going to affect you? Well, the government says that the cuts are necessary, and those who really are in need, the most vulnerable people, will not be affected. Not everyone agrees with that, though. BBC Radio Lancashire's Paul O'Gorman is live right now with Rose Trustam from the Preston Learning Disability Forum. Good morning, Paul.
Yeah, good morning, Graham. And when you said that, then Rose just chuckled slightly because the most vulnerable people won't be affected. What's wrong with that statement, Rose?
Well, I'm talking about people with learning disabilities who I think are the most vulnerable. And we did a piece of work fairly recently looking at how it would impact on about 40-odd people, and found that 10% of them will lose their benefit altogether, which means they could lose £71.45 a week when you add the income support loss from that as well.
Out of what?
Out of 142.45.
So the majority of the money going... Just tell me about the Preston Learning Disabilities Forum. What is the organisation? What sorts of people do you represent and try to help?
Well, it's a group of people who come together voluntarily, really, around concerns about what's happening for people with learning disabilities. So it's service users, carers, some providers, some people who are concerned in the area, people like Northwest, Disability Equality Northwest, for example.
And in a sense, you're a voice for people who, I wouldn't say they don't have a voice themselves, but they must be finding times like this terribly confusing. When you did the survey, you bore that in mind whilst you were actually conducting your research, didn't you?
Yes, I think we were very worried that some people would not understand that this is something that's coming in gradually and needs some preparation for. And so we did 75% of the interviews we didn't do live. We actually looked at how people would be affected as a tabletop exercise. People who knew them really well looked at the criteria, and there were about 11 people that we actually interviewed face-to-face who we felt we could actually support to understand better.
And what are your worries then? What give me, no names, no pack drill, but a typical person that you deal with, what effect could it have on them?
Well, I think we're very worried about the people who have what's seen as less needs because they have more abilities. So, for example, they may have very little reading or numeracy understanding. They may actually struggle with some of understanding life's difficulties. And so, for example, they may have to buy convenience foods, which are much more expensive. And most worrying, I think, the criteria don't really take account of their vulnerability in the community. So we've heard a lot about hate crime. These are people who are particularly vulnerable to being picked on by people. And so, for example, if they're out at a time that's not a very safe time, they would get a taxi. Now that's the kind of use of some of this money to keep them safe.
Yeah. But the government has said, we're all skint. We do need to save money, don't we? The aim of this legislation, and the government's been upfront about it, is to reduce the amount of money. And also, there is a feeling among some people that, lots of us are working hard, paying taxes, while other people are, in bed. Is that not a fair thing?
Well, it's completely unfair in the way that the cuts are happening. There's a report by the Campaign for a Fair Society that was released in the 17th of January. It actually shows that disabled people who are 8% of the population actually are having 29% of the cuts. The most severely disabled, who are 2% of the population, they have 15% of the cuts. The government isn't looking at how all the cuts add up. So it's the cuts to social care, the cuts to the benefits system. When you add them all up, they actually impact really hard on the most vulnerable people.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us this morning, Rose. A very worrying time then, briefly.
Very worrying. The only safeguard at all is that it's not all happening at once, but it means it's going to trickle out and we're going to build. And the irony is some people will do better on this new benefit, but all that'll happen is that money will go to the local authority in extra charges. All the people we looked at were in substantial or critical need, so how could some of them not get this benefit?
Interesting stuff. Rose, thank you very much for joining us. Paul O'Gorman, thanks for joining us as well from Preston. Mark has texted us from Burnley today. He says, hi, it's not just housing benefit here. Under this Reform Act, the DLA, I presume that's Disability Living Allowance, will be replaced by personal independence payments over the next 2 years. Thousands of people on DLA will have their money reduced. That's from Mark in Burnley. 81333, put Lancs in front of your message, get in touch.
Waking up the Red Rose County. Graham Liver at breakfast.
On BBC Radio Lancashire.